Hello friends, this is Odds, now available as an NFT for $5 million. And today I'm going to present my killer tier list for the upcoming patch for Dead by Daylight. I heavily encourage you not to refer to this tier list as a guide as for which killers you should play or should not play. All of the killers, without exception, in this tier list, even the ones at the bottom tier, are fun, viable in most cases, and perfectly strong in the right capable hands. So please keep that in mind. You should play whatever gives you the most fun. That being said, there are definitely differences between them. We can judge them all on a number of factors and try to rank them. That's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to work under a lot of assumptions and conditions, which might not be the ones that you would like, but they're the ones that I've chosen to try to make it as general and useful as I can. I'm assuming that we are on the PC version of Dead by Daylight, and this comes with a lot of advantages. 120 FPS, big resolution, mouse and keyboard support, all these things that naturally come with PC. We're not going to be assuming extra help from software enhancing the audio, stretch resolution, macros. We're not going to be assuming anything extra, but we are playing on PC. And this tier list would look slightly different because some of the killers are particularly difficult to play on console. Keep that in mind. We're also assuming, as I said, that the new patch has already come out, the 4.7 update. Some killers have been changed, some of the add-ons have been reworked, some of the perks have been altered. All of that will be taken into account. And with that, we'll be ranking each killer on their ability to win reliably and consistently in a number of different scenarios. Now, how exactly they win, whether they win at 5 gens very quickly or whether they win later into the match in a prolonged fight, it doesn't really matter. We don't really care about how they win. There's a lot of different playstyles, but how consistently they can do it. And of course, we're assuming that you're just playing a bunch of matches and that you go to all the maps, not just the ones that are good for you, that you get to use any perk you want. Perks don't really go away or disappear. So we're assuming that you're just bringing the best perks that you have at any given time. And we're also considering all the add-ons. Now, the add-ons that are more common, we're going to be considering a little bit more. The ones that are very rare, we'll also consider, but not as much. That doesn't mean that if a killer has bad add-ons that we are forced to use them. Instead, we're going to be assuming that each killer is bringing a different combination of add-ons, not just one, but a few different combinations of add-ons that you would typically expect to see on that killer. We're also going to be assuming that on the survivor side, this is not a competitive tier list where the survivors know what they're expecting. This is just a public match. And you would find the typical mixture of solo and survivor friends. About 50% of players play with friends. About 50% of players play by themselves. So you're going to be assuming that on average, there will be a mixture like that. And that we're also going to be encountering the perks, items, and offerings that they typically bring. So on any given match, you might have a toolbox, a flashie, a medkit. You might have the occasional map offering. You might have the occasional rare perk. But on average, you would just see the perks that are typically used at higher ranks. And also, obviously, each survivor is different. Some of them are really good. Some of them are a bit more new. But on average, we're going to be assuming that the survivors are good and capable, and they know how to counter your power the same way that you know how to use your power. So with that out of the way, we can actually reveal our tier list, which looks a little bit like this. And again, killers in the S tier are not unbeatable. Killers in the D tier are not terrible. All of the killers are pretty capable. Let's delve into them one by one and see what makes them be where they are. In the S plus category, we have on first place the Spirit. The Spirit has only a few strengths, but they are so notable and so overwhelming that they really justify her position being first. Namely, the Spirit has an insanely powerful chase potential that, unlike any other killer, actively removes a skill component from the survivors. When you play against really good survivors as a Spirit, their skill, their mechanical skill, their knowledge does not factor in nearly as much as with other killers, because the fact that when you stand still and you use your power, they have very little information to go on. You are capable of getting down basically in any loop in the game, and survivors have to actively really outplay you or get a little bit lucky. And if you are using a good headset or you have the right perks to hear better, this becomes increasingly more and more difficult. And the thing is, That's pretty much all she has going for her, but it is such a powerful ability. And with add-ons, it only really gets better. The fact that her power allows her to move really fast also gives her a really nice mobility on demand. Now, this mobility comes at a sacrifice. When you use your mobility, you have to recharge your power, you cannot use it for chase for the next few seconds. But all of these things really, really don't matter the moment that you factor in the add-ons that the Spirit has. Spirit has some of the strongest, most oppressive, both in effect but also in number, set of add-ons in the entire game. And some of them, when you put them together, make her chasing potential even stronger, her recovery less of a problem, and they really, really stack together in a very, very mean way that makes her have mobility and chasing potential. And when these two things are as high as they are for the Spirit, almost everything else doesn't matter. The fact that she doesn't have a lot of extra tools for finding survivors, it doesn't really matter. You can make up for it with perks and other tools. Now, what is the deal with her add-ons? Her add-ons scale extremely well. Her brown add-ons are noticeably good. Her yellow add-ons start to get really, really strong. Her green add-ons are some of the most busted ones in the game. Her purple add-ons are serviceable, and there's a few really strong ones. And her iridescent add-ons, namely the Mother-Daughter Ring, are just downright broken. They make her go at a speed that is extremely unreasonable, and there's no real trade-off for that. She loses basically nothing. So a Spirit that plays with the absolute best add-ons out there is probably the strongest killer in the game. That, as I said, even really good survivors will struggle. The fact that she has no real bad maps only furthers this position. And one thing you have to understand about her add-ons is that they are not working as intended, some of them. Her recovery add-ons make her recover her power quicker. But then she has duration add-ons that make her power last longer. And there is an unintended feature with the duration add-ons where they accidentally also increase her recovery add-ons, her recovery power. So if you use duration and speed, you will have good duration, good speed, and good recovery. All three of them at once, and it is really, really overpowering. The Spirit can lose a match, obviously, if you are not on point, if you make a few mistakes, but if you play absolutely on point, there's basically no match that you cannot win. And she is so powerful that even in competitive DBD, survivors often have a hard time against her. That's pretty much it for the Spirit. Next up is the Nurse. The Nurse has an equally powerful base kit ability. She, much like the Spirit, completely disregards many of the mechanics of the game. She is a little bit more predictable than the Spirit. Her power works in a more predictable way. But even more so than the Spirit, she does not care about survivor resources at all. A Nurse, at the end of the game, is just as powerful as she is at the start of the game. No amount of pallets, windows, really does anything to stop this killer. She needs to be played against in a much different way than basically any other killer in the game, where you constantly need to remove the line of sight and try to make her guess. But unfortunately, even if you do all of that, the Nurse has a lot of resources to play around it. She can play it very safe and slowly choke you into a corner of the map where no matter what mind game you try to pull off, she'll eventually land in the right place to get a hit on you. And she also has add-ons that reduce basically any risk associated to using her power. On the lower spectrum of rarity, she's got serviceable add-ons that give her some extra help in tracking survivors or even recovering from blinks. And then she's got the recharge add-ons, which allow her to chain up blinks more and more frequently. And the range add-ons, which are just really, really powerful. Escaping a Nurse that has range add-ons is just basically impossible. You can hit her with a decisive strike right in a straight line, and she will be on you in 3 seconds afterwards. Very, very oppressive. Some of the other add-ons are also kind of serviceable and has very, very few bad maps. The fact that her power allows her to ignore verticality means that some of the maps that are typically troublesome for other killers are just a breeze or a minor inconvenience for her. And the few bad maps for Nurse where her line of sight is constantly blocked, like say Larry's, the hospital, are still not completely lost cases for her. She's also a monster in competitive, where if you use the strongest perks, which she has perfect synergy with, and the strongest add-ons, survivors typically have a very, very, very hard time. Honestly, it is a really good toss between Spirit and Nurse for the first spot in the entire tier list. I think that if you consider all the add-ons, Spirit might get a bit of an advantage. Another thing about Spirit is that her add-ons are really, really hard to understand from the survivor's side. Whereas the Nurse is a little bit more predictable, and you can typically sometimes extend the chase and use your perks against her a little bit better than you could against a Spirit. A good Dead Hard will typically delay a Nurse and force her to waste an extra blink, whereas against a Spirit, it is a lot harder to use your perks against her. That being said, both are really, really powerful and on a league of their own, arguably, separate from even the next set of killers. The next set of killers in the S tier are also very powerful, but they do begin to have weaknesses, and they do begin to have inconsistencies, as we'll see. The first one is the Blight. The Blight is a newcomer to tier list, and definitely a surprising one for many people, but he really is a force to be reckoned with, and also one of the killers that you see in competitive. Now, we need to consider that the Blight right now has an ability called the J-Flick, or Japanese Flick, that allows him to hit around corners at an angle that the developers never intended. I am assuming that you are not doing this, as we are assuming that you're not having any DPI help. But even without any DPI trick, the Blight can hit around corners at a pretty crazy angle just with normal DPI if you have the reflexes and flick your mouse quickly enough. So Blight has a really, really strong base kit, and even though he doesn't flat out ignore the elements of the map as much as the other two killers, he does have the ability to ignore the strategy that hurts many of the killers in the cast, which is just holding forward. This is a killer that can catch up to survivors extremely fast, even if they hold forward, whose mobility works in basically any map that doesn't have a real cooldown or condition to it, like some of the other killers where they only have mobility for a little while. And this killer can catch up to any survivor very, very quickly and begin to use his power. At his absolute worst, he is a 115 killer who needs to play loops normally, with the occasional use of his power here and there to secure a hit. At his best, he's basically an unstoppable machine that can pinball in basically any loop to secure or almost secure hits on any survivor. And this speed often translates in the ability to injure a survivor, quickly injure another survivor, be at a gen when you need to defend it, get that person injured as well, hook someone, and now no one can do anything. As even big maps that typically hurt other killers are not that big of a deal when you move that fast. In terms of add-ons, he does have a very scary repertoire as well. From add-ons that increase his speed when he bumps further and further, to add-ons that reveal survivors around him, to add-ons that completely replenish his power once he hits you, so that he doesn't even have any cooldown after that and can immediately catch up again. Iridescents that are pretty strong and powerful. The Blight's add-ons are pretty nutty. And playing against a good Blight that also happens to have good add-ons is really terrifying. Even though his power does not allow him to use M1 perks, he does have synergies with really, really good perks. And the builds that you can put on Blight really make an impact. The reason why he's a notch below Spirit and Nurse, arguably, is because he is a little bit inconsistent. Some maps are very difficult to play. His bouncing is difficult to maneuver indoors. It's difficult to maneuver even in maps that have very dodgy collision. You need a massive knowledge of the maps to know where exactly you will bounce off predictably and where the bounce doesn't work quite well. But that's something that with experience you will get used to. And this is just a killer that if you play against the good one, you will see just how terrifying and oppressive things can get. Even though he might have a couple maps like this, where his power is a little bit harder to use, there's also a large number of maps, namely the very big ones, where the typical killer would struggle, where the Blight has zero issues with the size, just because he can cover distances so very well. And his add-ons only help in doing this, and some of them also help a lot in chase. With extra speed, Blights can bomb repeatedly into a wall and be fast enough to hit you around the corner. They can also see your aura and predict your movements. And it's typically hard for the survivors to immediately know what a Blight is capable of doing. So that element of unpredictability is also there with him. A very, very strong killer. Definitely easier to play on PC than on console, however. Next, we move on to the Hag, which is the most unique out of any of the killers so far. The thing that sets the Hag apart from basically any other killer in this tier list is the fact that she is a setup killer. Especially with the other three and with many of the killers we'll see, at the start of the match, you typically want to seek out survivors, start a chase, and end the chase as soon as possible. With Hag, you do not want to do such a thing. You instead want to build a web, a perimeter of traps that will be impenetrable. And once you catch a survivor in this perimeter and you are able to defend them, that's typically GG for the survivors. Once a Hag has a perimeter of traps and someone deep inside them, getting into it without being hit immediately is very, very difficult. The way to beat a Hag is by immediately realizing that you're playing against a Hag, which is very difficult. This is not a tournament where the rules are laid out. This is just a normal match you're playing against normal survivors who have probably not played against a Hag in a little while. Not everybody will realize that they're playing against a Hag 3 seconds into the match. They'll often take a little while, especially if they spawn a gen and start working on it immediately. So the way to beat a Hag is to immediately realize, which is difficult, and have at least one person begin to harass the Hag so that her web setting is disturbed and her time is wasted. In the meantime, the other survivors should be doing as many gens as possible and powering through them before the Hag eventually gets a down, begins to defend, and if they do their job well enough, they'll finish all the gens with maybe a person on the hook or a couple hooks having taken place, and then they'll use all of their manpower to try to get out of that situation or just give up a person and try to escape. This is extremely difficult for the average group of survivors. The average group of survivors, even if they're on comms, does not have the information or the capability to immediately adapt to playing against the Hag. And if you play a Hag well in a normal match, what you'll typically be able to do is set up a very decent web of traps, eventually catch a survivor, and from there, they will require very, very, very solid gameplay to get out of that. Some changes to consider. Borrow time is changing and will no longer be based on distance. That will hurt the Hag a little bit. A target that gets rescued will now be able to trigger as many traps as possible and get them out of the way, knowing that they have BT for 12 seconds. And we still have things that counter her, such as flashlights that you need to look out for. But Hag is still overwhelmingly really, really powerful in most scenarios. Because of her ability to just set up traps and be defensive, she doesn't really mind maps nearly as much as other killers. Maps that are typically difficult for other killers are just fine on Hag. The 1 or 2 maps that are not so good for her are the really large ones, where it's harder to keep a web of traps, and it's harder to predict where survivors will come from because there's so many paths, like say Rotten Fields. But even in these maps, you have a very good chance. The Hag's base kit is really powerful, but her add-ons only add on to that. She can teleport to 40 meters, which can go up by 8, by 10, or by 12 meters with add-ons, even brown ones being really, really powerful. She can also keep the traps up for longer, which helps in mind games and in some tiles. She can also have information by reading aura when people trigger her traps, which can be very useful. She can also set them even quicker, which comes in handy, again, with brown, yellow, and green add-ons. And even though her high rarity add-ons are really weird and for the most part quite bad, her normal range of add-ons is really, really, really powerful. Put some mean perks on Hag, and most of your matches will be very, very, very one-sided. Next up, we're going to the A tier. The A tier killers typically have 1 or 2 weaknesses, but their offensive capabilities are such that survivors have to really, really be careful. These killers can threaten to end the game immediately if the survivors make a single mistake, and this happens more often than not, especially if 1 or 2 of the survivors are not well coordinated or they are not playing at a very high level. Our first killer in this tier is the Huntress. Now, the Huntress is a killer with ridiculous offensive capabilities. She can chew through health states extremely fast with her base kit, but this becomes even more and more apparent with add-ons. And the add-ons in particular scale rather well. And there are a few combinations that allow her to very quickly transition from a hit from her special attack into a grab or an M1 or even another hatchet. And she has the potential to down people extremely quickly in the open, to down multiple survivors during unhooks and altruistic play. And if you witness Huntresses that have tons of experience, you'll see that many loops have openings where the Hunters can very quickly down you if you're not careful. And even the difficult loops allow some of the very skilled Huntresses to create situations where a survivor that's not playing extremely well will take a hatchet here or there. Even if a match is difficult, because survivors get a good map where there's difficult lines of sight, Huntress can still go through pallets. She can still power through it and just look for that one opportunity where she'll be able to snowball and very quickly win the game. She does need to waste a little bit of time to reload. She does have a humming radius that basically removes any stealth plays from her playstyle, and she does have limited synergies with perks that other killers use very well. Insta-downing perks, not typically good on Huntress. But despite all of this, just the fact that survivors are never too far from having multiple health states removed from them, even from a distance, makes this killer a really, really powerful one, but one that probably requires an insane amount of experience and an insane amount of hours put into them, as they have an extremely high skill ceiling. So as for add-ons, we're already assuming that the rework has happened. She does have a very, very respectable scaling of add-ons. The lower tier add-ons are fine, and they get better and better. And typically with purple, green, and yellow add-ons, you can have some really, really mean combinations that make her powers stronger or reduce some of her weaknesses. The number one problem with Huntress, and the reason why you wouldn't put her even higher in the tier list, is that some maps, no matter how good you are just extremely difficult to manage, and you will occasionally come against really good survivors that are playing structures that are extremely safe, and she is, after all, a killer that moves at 110, that cannot chase normally, and some struggles will be had in places like this, where survivors use their smaller hitbox to make it very, very difficult for you to wrap up a chase quickly. Other than that, the potential of this killer is typically off the charts, and it's really up to you to show it. Next up, we have another killer that can really make things go from 0 to 100 really, really fast, and it's the Oni. The Oni has a difficult early game, and the better the survivors, the more difficult this can be. At the start of the game, the Oni basically has no power. This is the moment where he is the weakest. And he needs first to find a survivor, get a hit on them, and once a survivor is injured, they begin to drop blood. Once you collect enough of this blood, you can then begin to use your power. Now, luckily for you, in your normal matches, where it's not a competitive tournament, survivors are pretty laid back, they're pretty casual, they're pretty not on guard, and you will be able to get a hit. Even against very decent survivors, a good Oni will either get some very strong pallets out of the way, or a hit in a reasonable amount of time. Even if you have to sacrifice a minute before you get your first hit and you begin to build up your power, that is something you can afford. Because once you get your power, you have a lot going for you. Once Oni has Blood Fury available, he can turn it on, and he gains extremely good mobility that works basically in every map. He can bump into things, so even very tight maps are not an impediment to his mobility, which is awesome. He has the ability to one-shot, the ability to get pallets out of the way relatively quickly. And he can also dash and flick to a side, which is powerful in loops. And also use an extended lunge that can be useful as well in loops. Think of it like a tier 3 Myers, where his lunge is a bit longer and he can do that as well. Now, this is pretty strong, but really begins to shine once you have add-ons. Your power, I believe, lasts about 45.45 seconds, and this can be extended with add-ons. Typically, when you're down a survivor, you will lose a part of your power, so you cannot use it for very extended periods of time. With add-ons, you can negate some of this by making your power last longer, which is always good. If your power lasts longer and you cancel it midway, that will also mean that you will require less blood next time to start picking up blood orbs and get your power again. And there are other add-ons also that help in a number of ways. We have the add-ons that make survivors drop extra blood. This can make it so that it's even faster for you to constantly be using your power and cycling in and out of it. There's the ones that make you move even faster, giving you the ability to close gaps across the map even quicker, or be even more threatening in certain loops. And most notably, we have the add-on, the Scalp Top Knot, that cuts your charge time for the dash in half. This add-on is pretty ridiculous. With any other add-on combination, you have to charge up your dash for a little bit and sometimes cancel it and then use it again. And survivors have quite a lot of room to get into dead angles, to go around corners, make you have to guess a little bit and make it a little bit difficult. With the Scalp Top Knot, they have no such luxury. You can cancel your power and use it again, or come out of your dash and then immediately begin it again so damn fast that basically any loop in the game becomes, if you play it right as the Oni, it becomes a death trap for most survivors, and they will eventually go down. And the really nice thing about this is that for the most part, you can play around many perks. If a survivor uses life to make some distance, you will catch up to them very quickly because you're moving at almost 200 movement speed. Same with the Sprint Burst. A well-timed Death Heart can give them a bit of oxygen, but still, you can play around big maps, mobility perks, just fine with your power. The Oni also has a similar deal to the Blight, where his DPI and playing right can make him get turns that are a little bit unusual, and there's a lot of tricks involved in using his power. Now, you need to strike a careful balance of downing survivors, but also picking them up, so that anti-slugging perks don't hurt you too much. But the fact that an Oni can, at any given point, get some very quick downs back to back makes him extremely dangerous. And I don't think I've ever lost as many games against the killer once I've done 3 or 4 gens. Typically, any other killer will struggle. It is not uncommon for an Oni to lose 2 or 3 gens and still make up for it just by the sheer power of how oppressive he is once he gets his power going. Decent synergies with many perks and a good range of add-ons. His higher rarity add-ons and his lower rarity add-ons are not all that worth it, but the add-ons in the middle are generally pretty damn good. With that out of the way, I think that's about all I have to say about Oni. I have a feeling I'm forgetting something important about him, but I guess it's nothing. Next up, we're moving on to Plague, and Plague does have weaknesses. Her fountains have some RNG to them. Some maps will spawn fountains in very awkward places, very convenient for the survivors to cleanse, very difficult for her to drink and make use of. Sometimes you'll have the opposite. You have fountains in extremely busy areas where you can quickly drink from them. But this can be mitigated by add-ons, because with extra add-ons you can bring more and more fountains and use them more aggressively. And that is the way to play the Plague. The Plague is basically a mixture of Legion, since she can injure everyone in long term, and Huntress, where she can very, very quickly use her projectile to damage people at a distance and play her at loops. And her add-ons are pretty damn incredible. From brown to pink, we have a very, very good selection of add-ons that allow her power to be a bit more consistent, allow her infection to happen quicker, bring extra fountains, charge up faster with the rubbing oil, which is one of the most powerful ones, and a bunch of other effects which go from pretty good to downright really, really powerful. Now, if you know how to play Plague and use her power, a really considerable amount of loops in the game become absolute death traps where survivors have no chance to ever last more than a few seconds before taking a hit or even going down. With cooldown add-ons in particular, she can go through hell states extremely fast on a single survivor, but even more so when survivors are piled up. A survivor that is unhooking someone, even if they hide behind the person they're unhooking, can be hit with the red puke. So you could completely interrupt someone rescuing, or wait until they rescue and hit both people at once with your red puke. And if borrowed time comes up, you can hit the second person very, very quickly. Her ability to chew through hell states and slug people and play very aggressively and completely shut down altruistic plays is really, really scary when she's using her red puke. Before she gets to use her red puke, she also has the ability to take advantage of grouped up survivors by infecting them and letting them go and focusing on other survivors. And if she manages to slow down the game enough, eventually those people that she infects will be injured. A really nice plus is that this injury cannot be mended normally. Survivors will need to give her the stronger power by cleansing, which they can do in a number of ways. Or just choose to remain injured. If they remain injured, medkits cannot be used. So Plague by default immediately counters a good chunk of items from the survivor side. And any stealth perks become redundant and really useless, pretty much. Because Iron Will not cover up for the cuffs. Things like Lucky Break will not cover up the stench, the green particles. So survivors are very easy to track once they're injured, especially after they're fully injured. Which is really, really nice because by default, Plague already counters a nice subsection of items like medkits, healing perks like say Botany Knowledge, and also stealth perks like say Iron Will. So by default, this character is already countering perks that you will typically find on your matches quite a lot. Some of her add-ons get quite ridiculous and are quite sneaky, and survivors are not always aware of what they're dealing with. Namely, the Black Incense allows her to keep track of every survivor in the match, regardless of distance, if they are fully infected. This can be really, 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 really powerful. And then you have the add-ons that can make you fully injure a survivor if they go through a window in front of you because you have effectiveness. And anybody that goes on a hook and is fully infected will infect whoever's coming. What are the weaknesses of Plague? Where does she suffer? The fact that survivors have a way to heal, fully heal, is a problem sometimes. If a match is going south and you're already losing and all the gens pop, survivors will now all heal at once, and at that stage, it will be very hard for you to come back. Sometimes survivors can heal and you can be a bit unlucky and not capitalize on the power that they're giving you. If you get stunned by a pallet, it's not a huge deal. You should typically know how to avoid this and play around it. If you get stunned by a pallet, you will lose your power, which is also something that you have to be careful around. There's also just the fact that her projectile speed is not very fast. So survivors that play very, very tight on loops that have high walls will make it very difficult for you to hit your hits. Similar to a Huntress, but even more difficult because, again, your projectile speed is lower. So she does have weaknesses, and survivors can play around them, and there's a lot of decision making involved with her. However, with the rarity of add-ons, with the repertoire of add-ons that she has, from any rarity being so good and many maps being powerful for her, I really think she is one of the strongest killers in the game, and one that also has a very high skill ceiling. Next up, we have Pyramid Head, who some time ago would have been even higher in the tier list. He has received some changes. First of all, he lost the ability to drag the sword and then immediately M1 out of it. After that, he had the ability to fake putting the sword down and then hit. He can no longer do that either, which is a bit of a shame. I also could preface this killer by saying that his add-ons are not incredible. The really, really high rarity add-ons are just straight up bad. The pink and purple ones are really, really bad. The brown ones have typically small effects, and some of the yellow, greens, and browns are okay-ish, and they make him a little bit better, but they are not the oppressive tools that we see on other killers. So his add-ons add a little bit, but don't really become game changers by themselves. His power, his basic ability, however, is pretty damn dope, despite some of the nerfs that it's received. You have basically two powers: the ability to set trails on the ground that will detect survivors, torment them, and eventually allow you to cage them, and the punishment of them ranged attack. Let's begin with the punishment. The punishment is an insanely powerful attack. The trade-off that Pyramid Head has received from these nerfs is that his punishment now has a cooldown of 2.25 seconds. That is significantly shorter than an attack from your basic weapon. And this means that you can hit a survivor, multiple survivors even, if they are all lined up, this is possible, and recover very, very, very fast. If they are cornered or if they are out of position, you can very, very reliably hit with your power and then catch up and hit with a normal attack or follow it up with another use of your power. And this is something survivors need to actively play around and be very careful. Once you get to a loop with this killer, you can very easily drag your sword and put a bit of trail, and the survivor is forced to either leave the loop, which may or may not work out for them immediately, or keep running the loop and become tormented. And when they are tormented, and sometimes you can punish them and corral them in a way that you pretty much force them to become tormented, basement plays, and so on. Many good things happen for you. You have the ability to immediately hook them into a cage that counts as a hook, or literally chop them in 3 seconds and kill them outright if they're already on their final stage, which saves you tons of time and allows you to snowball much better than other killers that would typically have to pick up, hook, and or risk losing someone on the ground that gets picked up very quickly. The fact that the hooks, that the cages don't have any perks working on them is both good and bad. It is bad for you because many killer perks that are strong do not have synergy with these cages. You cannot use Barbecue and Chill with the cages. You cannot use Devour Hope. You cannot use Make Your Choice. Any killer perk becomes that relies around hooks becomes immediately weaker on Pyramid Head for the most part. But this also comes with an amazing advantage, which is that you completely deny all of the survivors' hook perks, which are far stronger and far more common among survivors. Borrow Time, Camaraderie, Will Make It, Decisive Strike, Deliverance. Basically, any perk that revolves around the hook is completely useless against this killer if you are managing to torment them. And that is very, very, very significant. Without the ability to use BT or Decisive Strike, this also means that if a person comes out of a cage a little bit too early, they are always at the risk of you tunneling them, targeting them immediately afterwards, and either getting them on their second stage or killing them outright. So any survivor you cage is potentially susceptible to being immediately hooked again or immediately caged again, and this is very, very dangerous, and survivors need to really play well to avoid this. Even though you don't see where a survivor ends up when you cage them, it's very easy to guess. And even if you don't guess exactly right, when they do uncage the survivor, you will receive a notification from it. So it is a constant danger that survivors have to play around very, 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 very carefully. There are also many situations involving altruism where Pyramid Head really, really shines. he has the ability, if timed correctly, to hit 2 survivors that are uncaging, and this will typically result in a hit for both, and that's really devastating, and 2 survivors that are unhooking. And yeah, borrow time can happen, and yes, maybe the survivor that was unhooking was healthy, so they don't go down, but getting 2 health states and recovering in 2 seconds is very, very powerful. So all of these situations must be avoided. Survivors need to stay away from each other for the most part. They need to avoid torment, but they also need to avoid going down quickly. Since his power can hit you downright staircases, through windows, through walls, through pallets, you need to be very, 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 very careful. And that's where his weakness is. If a survivor, since Pyramid Head doesn't have any way to insta-down survivors, if a survivor is really, really, really good and really makes it difficult, pre-dubs every pallet, plays it really safe, that's where Pyramid Head will struggle. He will lose in the 1v1 because holding forward against him and just keep moving and never be corralled typically works out pretty well. With some good teamwork and some good 1v1s, Pyramid Head would struggle a little bit. But again, the sky's the limit. If you become good enough with him and your reads are absolutely on point, you will be hitting survivors through basically anything. And you will be catching many of them off guard with your plays. A lot of potential, but it's difficult to realize it. That's Pyramid Head for you. Next up, we have the Twins. The Twins are getting a change in the next update. Some of their iridescent add-ons are becoming stronger. But there will be a more severe punishment for Victor if he misses or lands a pounce on a down survivor. He will now have a longer window of 5 seconds as opposed to the current 3, which means that you will be kicked more often if you misplay or if survivors are teaming up and they don't allow you to down someone else without a consequence. Now, the teamwork against the Twins needs to be fairly on point from the survivors. This is a killer that can divide up, and if survivors are lone wolves, that doesn't always work out for them. Twins can hit a survivor, get them injured, hit another survivor, get them injured, send Victor off to someone. Now they need to come all together to heal up. Someone goes on the hook with Victor right next to them. Charlotte chases someone else, but then switches back to Victor. There can be so much chaos. This is gameplay where a tactician kind of killer that is really good at analyzing the battlefield and switching back and forth and knowing where to go and what to do and where to exert pressure really thrives. Survivors that are smart will make it very, very difficult for the first down to happen. They will often pair up, and if Victor downs someone, they'll use this chance to kick him because he's vulnerable after downing someone, and then use perks like We're Gonna Live Forever or Medkits or anything else to immediately pick up the survivor from the ground. You can also try to take Victor as far away from Charlotte as possible and then go into a locker, which would force Victor to hold the locker and then for Charlotte to come in and intervene. And in all of that back and forth, the Twins can lose a considerable amount of time. They do need certain perks to slow down the game, but there's nothing preventing you from running these perks. So these killers do require some perks to help this snowball, slow, methodic, grind down playstyle. If survivors are smart and play around these perks really, really well, they can easily put you in a situation that is difficult. If survivors do not try to deal with these perks and they find themselves in a situation where everyone's going down, then ruin, then I'm dying, then all these perks will really begin to hurt, and the progress generators will be brought to a halt. Now, one very considerable weakness that the Twins are going to have to face in the upcoming patch will be the brand new Lucky Break. Now, one thing that Victor can do extremely well right now is track an injured survivor. If Charlotte or Victor himself has hurt a survivor, Victor can immediately be detached from Charlotte and find blood that stays on the ground for a long time, that is very bright, and find an injured survivor, down him quickly, and then go from there. With the new Lucky Break, blood will not appear on the ground. Scratch marks will also not appear, although Victor doesn't see scratch marks anyway. And pair that with Iron Whale, or even without, Victor will have a really hard time tracking Lucky Break users. We don't know exactly how long Lucky Break will last for, But assuming that it's anything close to what we saw in the PTB, this will be a major struggle. So it would not be too crazy to say that Twins players will have to be a little bit more careful in how they use Victor from now on, unless they've already surveyed the survivor perks on the other side. On top of that, Victor used to be able to hit survivors off a hook, and because he doesn't have a terror radius, borrowed time would have no effect whatsoever. So Victor could get away with a lot of really, really scummy, sleazy playstyle where the person off a hook immediately goes down and so on. This will no longer work. If you hit a survivor with borrowed time now triggers in this update regardless of distance and regardless of terror radius, which means that that will be a really bad idea. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if survivors with borrowed time actively try to get in your way to tank hits for their teammates, which obviously would completely destroy your momentum. There's a lot of chances for Twins to waste a lot of time and not really be better off of it if they make mistakes. And again, because of the upcoming change, their mistakes will be punished a little bit more than before even. That being said, their add-ons are pretty decent. Brown add-ons are very serviceable. Some of the ones across the board are pretty useless, but the add-ons are pretty damn good, and the iridescents are only getting better. Extra movement speed helps Victor land hits even in loops that are difficult for him. The toy sword can let him charge up and hit survivors, even if they're playing really, really tight around many structures, which is really, really powerful and really, really oppressive. And Twins have very decent synergy with some of the perks that you can bring. And they don't really care about map as much, but they definitely do struggle a little bit more on the bigger maps where survivors can spread out a little bit more, and the distance between Victor and Charlotte can be so big that it's really hard to capitalize once you're down a survivor from that far away. Twins, overall, one of the harder killers to judge because of the information that's still in the air. But I'm fairly sure that if they're not on this exact place, they're somewhere close. You let me know what you think of them, however. Next up, we've got Deathslinger on our first position in the B tier. Now, Deathslinger is a killer that theoretically is extremely, extremely powerful. He has a gun, a harpoon gun that can shoot up to 18 meters in distance. And if you're hit by this gun, he has the ability to either reel you in and hit you directly, which would count as a basic attack, or if it's not possible, to break the chain and get you injured. And both of these things would result in you having to mend. So it is a killer that immediately puts some pressure on survivors and immediately keeps them injured for a bit longer than some others, as you'll have to mend before you can fully heal. Now, this is pretty damn strong. And this also goes on once you're already injured. Breaking the chain won't do anything other than reset your health and have to mend again. But once you're already injured, this killer also has a very good chance to hit you with his gun, chain you, and eventually reel you in for a hit. And this can be done in the open, this can be done in loops, this can be done through windows, it cannot be done through pallets. But even pallets and other structures where the survivors can put something between you and them, there are a lot of situations where very, 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 very good Deathslingers can shoot and then manage to work their way around the loop and turn a chain into an M1. And the better the Deathslinger, the more consistent that they'll be able to turn a chain into a hit. This is really, really good stuff. In theory. You would be landing absolutely every shot. In practice, however, survivors are unpredictable. The hitboxes are extremely tight and not unforgiving for the survivors, at least. You have to really, really land your shot, and you can lose a significant amount of momentum for missing a shot very, very narrowly, as you will have to slow yourself down, reload, and then catch up to a survivor again. You are a killer with a limited terror radius, which is awesome, but a killer does 110. And any missed shot will set you back significantly. The way a Deathslinger wins is by being extremely oppressive in the 1v1 and being extremely accurate, and also slowing down survivors with his mending, healing mechanics. So you would get someone injured, you would be doubting someone, and eventually the team would crumble because they wouldn't heal at the same rate that you're downing them. This is extremely difficult, as there's nothing preventing survivors from just splitting up and being smart and making you waste time shooting, reeling, hitting, picking up, reloading, getting to the next generator. There's nothing preventing them from making this take as long as they possibly can. That being said, you do have some perks available to you that can increase the effectiveness of this process. You can bring Sloppy Butcher to slow down the healing and try to slowly create a situation where everyone is in danger, and then a couple lucky shots and the whole team could collapse. You could bring Save the Best for Last. If you build it up, Deathslinger becomes a machine, and you can hit a survivor that's going for a rescue, you hit them, they go for the rescue, you down them again, then you shoot the person that was rescued. You can go through health states very, very quickly. And you could also bring inside down perks. Starstruck on him stands out in the recent patch. Very, very, very strong stuff. If you are good at the 1v1 and suddenly you only need one hit, this killer becomes a lot stronger, and that's one of the ways to play him very effectively. Now, the reason he doesn't get to compete with some of the big boys and girls in the higher tier lists is the fact that it is fairly easy once you're injured to know where this killer can get you and where he cannot get you. And you can play it very safe by pre-dropping pallets that are safe, by constantly being unpredictable, which means that he will have a huge risk trying to shoot you at mid-distance, and he will probably have to close in the distance to force you towards a certain looping where he can actually get the shot. So you can make it very, very difficult for a Deathslinger to play consistently. Even though his power, again, is very strong in theory, in practice, it is very, very difficult to land all of your shots. Even if you're very experimented, survivors have many resources. They can go behind cover, they can use dead hard around corners. They can make it tricky for you to really do what you do best. Pair that with the fact that you're a slow killer that needs to reload, and the unfortunate reality that your add-ons are not that incredible, and you have a killer that has a limited potential, even though he's really, really powerful and can be very, very oppressive in the 1v1, and can also get hits in places where other killers could only dream of. So despite all of these strengths, which are very notable, you are hard capped by some of these things. His add-ons, as we were saying, are pretty limited. They slow down survivors mending a little bit more. They inflict a few status effects a little bit more. They increase his reload a little bit, which is nice. But, you know, it's nothing insane compared to what we've seen on other killers. Other killers have add-ons that if Deathslinger had something similar to that power, he would really, really be busted. His add-ons are very, very mild compared to some of the other killers. His iridescents are, I wouldn't say useless, but they're pretty bad. And across the entire rarity spectrum, we have add-ons that are just straight up bad and weak. And even his best add-ons do not significantly alter his gameplay to a point where he becomes super oppressive. You could have reload add-ons. You could have the purple chain that allows him to reel you through walls a little bit more and get hits in places where he otherwise would struggle. Some add-ons to slow down, but nothing really too crazy, unfortunately. If you play him at your absolute best and you become an absolute beast, however, you will be able to outperform other killers and make survivors really, really upset, because in the 1v1, he definitely is very oppressive. It's the fact that you are not playing a 1v1, but that you're versing a full team that is actively doing gens at any given time, the one thing that makes Deathslinger struggle a little bit. Next up, we have the Cannibal. And my goodness, Cannibal has received quite the changes in the last few months. He would have been typically found in previous tier lists very close to the bottom, and rightly so. The Cannibal was a very slow killer that had to basically get right next to you to begin to use his Shenso. A couple of serviceable add-ons, but for the most part, nothing really helped. He didn't even have ultra add-ons, and yeah, that was pretty much it. Nowadays, Cannibal is a completely different beast. His Shenso gives him very, very significant mobility once he begins to let it go, and ramps up a speed that's very considerable. And where do I begin? His Chainsaw insta-downs, it goes up very, very fast, and it also shreds to pallets really, really quickly. Some of the things that this means. So while we're pre-doping a pallet, you can go through it basically immediately and get it out of the way almost faster than any other killer in the game. A survivor that waits until the last second to sprint burst away from you, you can quite literally become faster than them and hit them at the end of their sprint burst, which is insane. And this also happens if a survivor has borrowed time. If you hit a survivor, well, first of all, if there's two survivors on a hook, there's nothing stopping you from hitting them both. And if you hit the survivor that's unhooked and they have borrowed time, you can catch up to them and hit them again at the end of their sprint boost that they get from your hit. Without add-ons. Without any add-ons. And the add-ons only make this even more ludicrous. He does have some cute add-ons that bring you some utility. Make survivors broken, make survivors mangled, make survivors drop their items. These are fine. Get your recharges quicker. These are okay-ish. Some of them are also quite bad. The iridescent add-ons are fun and sometimes unpredictable and potentially powerful. But then we've got the more reliable add-ons that you typically want to bring on Cannibal, which are the chilies and even the Beastmark engravings-like add-on. With these add-ons, you can turn his playstyle of revving the chainsaw from afar into a considerable threat that you can use reliably throughout the match. You do not need to wait like before to being right next to the survivor or even close. You can begin to rev your chainsaw from really, really far away and pick up such a speed that forces survivors to drop pallets immediately. Once those pallets are gone, you are creating real dead zones where you will down survivors in seconds. Unlike other killers that can insta-down, you do not need a lot of skill, and the survivors don't have a good shot at dodging it because the Cannibal can just follow you around, react to your movements, and hit you basically anywhere with his chainsaw as long as he has the charges and he's close enough. So once dead zones are created, this killer immediately will down anyone found in them. And of course, he threatens to insta-down anyone coming from rescues, anyone getting into a basement. He's a very powerful defensive killer as well, which very often comes into play and becomes a relevant factor. What happens if survivors hog windows and make it very difficult to, try to go into lockers, mid-chase? What happens if survivors try to play around this? He typically, he will struggle a little bit, but he has answers to all of this. Perks like Bamboozle work really well on him. If there is one strong window, you can preemptively get it out of the way and survivors will have less and less resources. And unless the survivors are really, really experimented and you don't know what you're doing, you can typically play around lockers just fine. And most interactions around lockers will result in you getting a grab or a hit or the survivor going down in one way or another. The fact that he doesn't really have a tool to pressure survivors across the map is the only thing that really hurts him. The worst thing that can happen to you with the Cannibal is that you chase a survivor for a little bit too long. They pre-drop every pallet. They play mega safe, as they should. And then gens pop in the distance. And by the time you get it down, now 3 gens have been lost and it's a losing battle. Nothing, however, is stopping you from running really oppressive perks to slow down gens at the start. You can run Corrupt, you can run Ruin, you can run Pop, you can run all 3 of them at once if you want to, if you're so inclined. To make the first gens really, really difficult, to make the later gens a little bit trickier to finish, and for you to wreak as much havoc and do as much damage early on as you can. With the chilies, really, you have a very, very, very good shot at downing survivors, even if they get greedy, even in the slightest. You can even use your chainsaw as a chasing tool if you're skilled enough in some tiles in the game, not unlike what Hillbilly can do. You can do a version of curbing by ramping at speed and hitting survivors in loops. You can wrap your chainsaw around corners and force survivors to do a 50-50. You can do a lot of damage. However, what is the one thing keeping Cannibal from being even higher in the tier list? As we said, he is a killer that has to wrap up a 1v1. That can sometimes be difficult. If you have multiple windows lined up, if survivors play it very safe and their teammates are diligent with their repairs and you commit at the wrong places at the wrong times, you can lose a lot of gens. And you don't have any crazy ability to slow down gens or find survivors. Although you do have some good synergies with perks and a few add-ons that can help with tracking, even like the light chassis, which helps you to see survivors through walls and can even help you mid-chase against an already injured survivor. And that's a really nice thing. You can use your chainsaw against injured survivors as well, because it is such a good tool. It's no longer something you use against the healthy survivor. It's something you can use throughout the match. Bigger maps obviously do hurt this killer, but overall, he really doesn't have any particularities about him that make him super bad in any one given map. And he is always capable of immediately snowballing if survivors do not play it safe. So for that reason, I think it's a quite solid B tier, and I do invite you to play him a lot and see his potential. Next up, we have Demogorgon, who has received some very lovely changes. He now recovers his power 4 seconds quicker and can travel every 10 seconds, which is awesome. He travels also a little bit faster. He now has basically half a rat liver base kit, which means that when he holds his shred, he moves a little bit faster. Awesome stuff. And his add-ons have some of them remain the same and are not very noticeable or very remarkable, but some of them have been changed to really scary, really powerful tools that are definitely game changers for him. On the brown side, we have an add-on that makes him recover faster from a successful shred. This is basically a save the best for last at 4 stacks for a shred. That is incredibly powerful. On a killer that can zone survivors, get hits in loops, and shred through pallets, the fact that he can recover quicker is really, really good for a brown add-on. We also have an equivalent yellow add-on that makes him recover faster from destroying a down pallet with his shred. Incredibly useful for a yellow add-on. Now, the weakness with Demogorgon is similar to what we just discussed with Cannibal. You chase a survivor that is just a little bit too good, has a little bit too much luck, has a little bit too much of a good setup, and the gems are flying across the map. With some of these add-ons, you can end your chases quicker, keep the pressure up when you destroy a pallet, even if a survivor plays it safe, and it's all really welcome. Some other add-ons include the ability to see which gens are being worked on. That, I believe, is 11's Soda, which is really nice. You have an add-on that gives you information on gens that you can use from the very beginning of the match that can replace a perk. That's incredible stuff. You also have an add-on that will reduce your portals but will make you travel much quicker. You have an add-on that will constantly detect anyone in range of an active portal. You can use this to defend totems like Devour Hope. Really powerful stuff. And the iridescent add-ons on Demogorgon are pretty insane. He can see the auras of all the survivors across the map for up to 3 seconds after leaving a portal. And then he has another iridescent that will allow him to use his portals completely silently. He gets a bit slowed down, but it's not even a factor. This is incredibly useful. In a close map, like Larry's, you are basically a better Mirror Myers, where you're teleporting, they don't hear anything, unless they pay attention to your sound cues, and you see where everybody is. Now, considering how strong it is for survivors to hide and use stealth early on, and how difficult a match can be if you don't find your first survivor quickly and a gen starts to get done a little bit too far from you, this is incredible stuff. You could put 2 portals at the start, immediately use one, and see where everybody is without any of them knowing that you have this information. So his range of add-ons is scarily good. Add on top of that, the ability to hit in most loops fairly consistently, if survivors don't play it very safe, the ability to shred through pallets, the ability to detect survivors around your generators if you place portals, the ability to teleport across the map fairly quickly, and with very little counterplay. Even if survivors cleanse your portals, you can still put multiple down. So even big maps, you can get around really quickly. And you have a killer that is not the best at anything, but he's pretty damn good at almost anything. Decent mobility, somewhat of a stealth, decent chase, decent pallet breaking and chasing tools. Honestly, remains to be seen whether we are being a bit too generous or we are underestimating him. But Demogorgon will be in a very solid place in my estimation. Next up, we have Freddy. Now, Freddy has received a number of changes directly and indirectly. Some time ago, he would have been very easily in the top tier of killers, in the top upper echelon, whatever you want to call it, for a number of reasons. He could have slowdown perks on top of slowdown perks on top of very oppressive slowdown add-ons, and use this to a scary degree. He could also ignore borrowed time, and saving against him was basically a nightmare. And it was honestly on a killer that is so easy to play that even a very average killer that's not particularly skillful could really kick your ass. Fortunately, some of these things have been changing over the course of the months, and in the upcoming patch, there are other changes and a big change of add-ons and base kit for Freddy. Let's go over some of these changes and understand why he's dropped so much and why we might be right or wrong about this. Number 1, he can no longer ignore borrowed time. Borrowed time does not work off terror radius. So no matter if survivors are asleep or awake, borrowed time is a thing that Freddy has to deal with now, which is nice because it was one of his major strengths early. His add-ons to slow down the game are all gone. They were very strong, they got nerfed, now they're just replaced entirely by other add-ons. This leaves Freddy's add-ons as pretty meh. Some of them are serviceable, but for the most part, the add-ons are really not all that impactful. You have add-ons to hear footsteps a bit louder, which is alrightish. To hear generators from a bit further, which is not awful, but also not very impactful. And then a bunch of really, really useless add-ons. At your best, you can use add-ons to keep survivors asleep so that your snares and your fake pallets can be used more frequently. You can use add-ons to recharge your teleporting a bit more faster so that your presence can be felt around the map a bit more often. There are some things you can do for sure, but there's really no oppressive combination of add-ons in the same way that you had before, and you cannot make strong perks against him even stronger. The ever-present Ruin Undying has now been nerfed, and it's not as powerful against him. So if you have an early game where you get rid of Ruin and Undying, and he brought that relying on it, now Freddy, without any slowdown, becomes a very average, mediocre killer. His snares have been nerfed. Placing them now slows you down, so you can no longer spam them as you go nearly as much. You need to be a lot more mindful of when and how you place them, because if you hold the placement of the snares, you will be slowed down significantly. And instead of having 8, you now have 5. You can no longer place them around for information and for general annoyance. You have to be very mindful of where you place them because they will be resetting, just like hack traps. If you're using one of the add-ons that gives him pallets, which are probably weaker than snares, you will now find out that instead of having 10 pallets, you now have 7. This is really not great. Some of the maps already have very few spots. And once you know it's a pallet Freddy, you can play around the fact it's really not an incredibly good deal. That being said, what does Freddy still have? He still has a bit of stealth. When people are in the dream world, they do not track you all that well. He can still teleport across the map, which makes him useful and powerful, and have him synergy with gen perks quite a bit. You can act on Tinkerer, you can act on Barbecue, you can act on Thrill and Tremors by teleporting to the gen that's about to be done and then deliver a pop, or immediately pressure with Ruin. You can do a lot of things with gen perks that are typically strong with just the ability to teleport alone, and that's great. That hasn't changed. And he also, of course, has the ability to put survivors in the dream passively, although now they have the ability to use clocks and stay awake for a forced 30 seconds. So if a survivor uses a clock, and they go out of their way to wake up from a clock, and you hit them, they will be completely unable to see. They will still be awake for another 30 seconds since they use the clock, and your snares and your pallets won't work for that time. So now more than before, Freddy becomes an M1 killer that has to deal with all the basic resources that survivors have. I still believe that the average team that struggles to communicate will probably have a bit of trouble with a Freddy that uses gen regression and gen info perks effectively. And Freddy is still a pretty versatile killer that can play well in almost every map and punish some plays and be a bit all over the place. But he's really not oppressive at any one thing now. And if you're well prepared for any killer, you should be well prepared for a Freddy. That being said, we might be underestimating his ability to just do that, and that might just be stronger than some of the other killers we've seen. So it's totally possible that Freddy could still be a little bit higher in the tier list and that we are underestimating him. Perhaps with this nerf, however, people will realize what it takes to beat a Freddy, and he'll be rightly placed right here. As we said, his add-ons really don't add much into the mix. He's got a bunch of useless ones across the board. His iridescent ones, one of them might be tweaked a little bit. It's like a mini Blood Warden. Doesn't seem all that powerful. The other one, the Paintbrush, does make everyone asleep, which is good. It means you recover your teleport faster. It means everyone is susceptible to snares from moment number one. But with fewer snares and fewer pallets, I don't think he'll be quite as aggressive anymore. Remains to be seen, however. Next up, we have the Doctor. And the Doctor has a lot in his base kit. He's a 115 movement speed killer that has all the weaknesses and strengths of 115 killers. He has to hit survivors, but he comes with some perks that make some... he comes with some... I don't want to say perks. He comes with some abilities that greatly enhance how you can use some of the perks on him. His Shock will drive up survivors in madness and reveal them. It's a great anti-stealth tool. And also, for 2.5 seconds, denies them of using pallets, windows, and whatnot. So a skillful Doctor will be able to deny pallets and deny window vaults here and there, and eventually oppress a survivor into a hit. This gives him very good synergy with insta-downing perks or lethality perks of any kind, like Save the Best for Last. If a Doctor is constantly downing you quicker with these perks and constantly denying loops, it is very hard to play against them. Although you can play it safely by pre-dropping pallets, by not going to the places where you know his power will shine the most. His add-ons are very remarkable. They add a number of different effects. You can choose to stack them together or to combine them to get some of the effects. When we get to higher rarities, things get a bit wild. The iridescent ones are particularly oppressive. They will make non-organized, non-coordinated groups probably struggle quite a bit, as they will shock each other with the iridescent Queen and drive up madness passively, pretty much. And they will also have to deal with a lot of misinformation that typically comes with Doctor. His terror radius will sound faintly, you will see illusions, he will lose his red stain. All of those things can happen with different add-ons, or all of them at once, seeing fake pallets, if he's using the iridescent King. That being said, even with the absolute strongest add-ons in the game, he still remains an M1 killer that has to rely on perks to help him get the downs a little bit quicker, especially if survivors are playing smart, spreading out, using lockers to avoid shock and whatnot, and trying to not give him more information than they need to. If survivors play it well, pre-drop pallets, play it safe, and put up as much resistance, the Doctor will typically struggle on maps where the size alone becomes a problem, or where the sheer amount of loops is just troublesome. And that's basically your weakness, and perhaps the one thing that keeps Doctor in the B tier as opposed to being any higher. That being said, survivors are very unpredictable, and it's hard to know how some of the more oppressive add-ons will work against solo players, and so on. Although I would say that the average player will have an idea of how to play against you, and should not do the things that would make you immediately dominate survivors. Survivors that camp pallets and let you shock them and then get an easy hit, obviously will make your life very easy. But assuming that you're playing against decent survivors, Doctor will be a bit of a struggle. Although again, his base kit has a lot of things going for him. His perk versatility is quite remarkable. He can use a lot of perks really, really well. He can double down on information to keep a chokehold on survivors. He can go for insta-down, he can go for all lethality perks, he can slow the game a lot and really keep a chokehold on generators with gen regression perks. There's a lot going on for him, and in my estimation, he belongs right around this tier. Although, I will say that some of these killers we've discussed, and some of the ones we'll discuss in a minute, I would say are all pretty damn close to each other. And it is really, really difficult, and this was probably the hardest part of the tier list, to precisely pin down where exactly they belong. So please keep that in mind. In your estimation, he might be higher or lower. This is where I personally place him. Next up, we have the Hillbilly. The Hillbilly typically would have been placed number 3 or number 4 for a very long time in a list of the strongest killers in Dead by Daylight. for many years, the Hillbilly was one of the strongest killers in the game, because other killers were just not that strong, and his add-ons only made him better and better. But those things have changed. We have now other killers that are getting stronger. The maps are getting a little bit more difficult to him as well, I would say. And his add-ons, after the rework, really don't help him. He also has a objectively worse base kit, where now his Chenso has an overheat meter. And this is not massively oppressive, but it does limit some of the things that you could do with Hillbilly. With Hillbilly before, you could use your Chenso probability, then use it to shred a pallet, then use it to shred another pallet, then use Enduring, recover from a pallet, and keep your Chenso charge, and then break the pallet immediately, and then use it, and then use it again, and then use it again, as much as you liked. Right now, if you get stunned by a pallet, your Chenso charge completely resets. You can no longer use Enduring for that. And if you keep using your Chenso on and on and on, the heat will build up very quickly, and your Chenso will stop working. You can use a number of add-ons to help you with this, but that's you're already starting at a deficit compared to all Hillbilly. His add-ons overall, I think, are quite laughable. The best ones being the low pro chains that allows you to break through pallets and get a hit that deals one set of damage. This is quite a game changer. You can also use it to break pallets quickly without committing to the full animation and keep the pressure on the survivor. Once the survivors see it, they obviously try to play around it. Still a really useful tool. You can still use the engravings that make him go faster to cover distances quicker. It does make it much more difficult to get a Chenso on a survivor abusing windows right in front of you, but it's something that you can make up for if you are incredibly good at Hillbilly and you pre-rep your Chenso and use and play around the slower charge. Some of the add-ons really don't do absolutely anything. It is they're quite laughable. The add-ons that give him stealth capabilities are fun and occasionally will yield some success against randoms in the typical match in an open field map. But being stealthy really is not the way to play this killer and will not yield any kind of consistent results across many maps and across groups of really good survivors. You'll notice that any stealth you get from Hillbilly add-ons or perks are they're only going to take you so far. So you'll typically go for low pro chains, engravings, some of the overheating add-ons. Funnily enough, the lower rarity, the ones that are more common, are better than the higher rarity ones. What you'll find is that the Hillbilly has some of the strengths of the killers that we've seen, but a lot more downsides to it. If you play Hillbilly in an absolutely perfect, flawless way, you can get hits around corners, you can curve in certain structures and insta-down survivors, you can get rid of pallets quickly but still pressure survivors, you can use your mobility to be a little bit everywhere and even put up some good resistance in bigger maps that are open. So if you play him absolutely perfectly, it can feel like he's at a level that other killers can achieve fairly effortlessly. Here's the problem. You're human, I am human, anyone that plays Hillbilly is also human, and the survivors that you're playing against are also perfectly capable of outplaying you. And Hillbilly has such a tiny margin of error. If you use your Chenso and you're off by a little bit, you will bump into something, you will overheat when you're not meant to, a survivor might just predict your play and move out of the way as you curve. There are so many things that can go wrong, and when these things go wrong, you overheat, you waste your time. Sometimes you bump into something which has an extremely long animation that gives survivors a lot of time to get away from you. And unlike Cannibal, you do not have a big margin of error with the possibility of messing up. If the Cannibal messes up, he probably will lose a significant amount of pressure. But it's so much harder for him to mess up, and it's so much harder for the survivors to really put up some kind of mind game or movement that will really challenge you. With Hillbilly, survivors can make it extremely difficult. Well, you'll need to guess what they're doing, know the exact timing and positioning for your Chenso curve, and then pull it off flawlessly. And even then, if you're off by just a little bit or you guess wrong, you're back to square one. At its worst, Hillbilly has a map with tons of pallets that he can't even get rid of quickly, because survivors can actually run you around them a lot more. and a lot of missed opportunities to get instant downs if survivors play it safe and survivors play it smart. At his best, Hillbilly can be pretty damn oppressive if survivors go down really quickly. Instant downing and having mobility is obviously incredible, but it is fairly difficult. It is fairly difficult when survivors really know what they're doing. And again, you'll need to play at a much, much higher level and be a lot more consistent than with some of the killers we've seen. So it really is a bit of a shame, and it is with a heavy heart that I place Hillbilly below so many other killers where he once was king of this game. Next up, we are talking about Ghostface. Now, Ghostface is the kind of character that really thrives on the fact that he has no indication to the survivors that he's coming. This is not a tournament where survivors know the killer or the map. And unlike some of the other killers like Plague, Pig, he doesn't have any prop in the map that announces that it's a Ghostface. So a very good Ghostface at the very start of the match will understand that he has a golden opportunity to set up a really, really good start by marking multiple survivors, by maybe getting a grab here and there, or marking someone on the gen and immediately downing them. The start of the game for Ghostface can be really, really powerful. And as a killer that has a 0 terror radius on demand, even maps that can be very, very difficult can sometimes become a bit of an asset. So other killers, like say a Doctor, would struggle on Haddonfield because they need to, or Batham because they need to find survivors in buildings and then they need to run around the buildings. With Ghostface, you might have the opportunity to just creep up to one of these buildings and get a grab or get a hit and then get a chase or a hook going, and hopefully a good rest of your game. So Ghostface has the ability to turn some bad maps into decent ones, and he also particularly performs well in the indoor maps where his lack of terror radius is a real threat to survivors. Leverage can be really, really powerful. Hawkins is one of his best maps. If survivors are on above glass panels or above catwalks, he can stalk right through them. Really good Ghostfaces invest time in finding little holes, nooks, and crannies where they can position themselves and see survivors from afar. Ghostface can stalk up to, like, I believe 40 meters away, and there's no decay of speed or anything like that. So for that reason, you can go on top of a building and see 3 survivors on a generator far away, and before any one of them really notices you, you can get them all fully stalked or 99 for later. And that's one of the strats that you're going to be doing as Ghostface. Since you're not very good at the normal chase, we'll get to that, you want to 99 people, and if you're not close enough to immediately down them, you will leave them and catch them off guard later when you have your chance to ambush them. Then you'll put them from 99 to fully marked and immediately down them. That's your playstyle as Ghostface. Every now and then, you'll also just go for normal hits and get them injured and remove your terror radius, catch them off guard. Sometimes you'll have to commit to a long chase where you get rid of a couple pallets, but that should be your plan B, never your main goal with Ghostface, because you really have not a lot of options to help you in chase. That being said, you do have some options. In some loops, crouching can help survivors completely lose you and can get you some hits, which is always nice. And removing your red stain is also a really powerful tool. In some tiles, removing your red stain can result in survivors losing you around corners and you doing mind games that would otherwise be almost impossible for taller killers with a red stain. So those are good things that good Ghostfaces will constantly take advantage of. The little holes, the element of surprise, the little things that they have in chase. So what are the downsides to playing Ghostface? Unfortunately, just like how close, tight maps are good for you, large open maps are pretty damn bad. Playing on Blood Lodge, running fields, really gives you very little room for this kind of playstyle and really, really hurts you. So immediately you do have some maps where things are going to be a little bit rough, where you have to adapt, where perhaps your build is not going to help you. In terms of add-ons, Ghostface is a bit of a joke. The only real add-ons you want to consider are the recovery add-ons that make him have his power available more frequently. With double recovery add-ons, there's 3 of them. One brown, one yellow, one green. With double recovery add-ons, you can get your power back in 16 seconds, 20 seconds, which is a lot better than 30. 30 seconds is an incredibly long amount of time. So if you play Ghostface without add-ons or with another combination of add-ons, any mistake will be fatal, as 30 seconds of not using your power for anything is very damning and very punishing. And even if you play well and ambush a survivor and hit them, you will still have to wait 30 seconds because you don't get rewarded for playing well with lower recovery. So you will typically want to run recovery add-ons and sometimes combine them with some of the other utility add-ons. There's an ultra rare that lets you see people from afar, which is a bit like a barbecue in an add-on, which is kind of nice, and some other add-ons that help a little bit, but nothing comes close to the power of recovery add-ons. So for that reason, if you stick to these add-ons, you have a serviceable killer. Anything else, however, results in a severe downgrade. In maps where survivors are very well communicated or where they see you really, really well, you will begin to struggle. If survivors are very aware, you get revealed at the wrong times, you don't really get to seal the deal in your first or second ambush, you will be forced to go on chases, perhaps at times where you really cannot finish them quickly. Go against a couple survivors with some strong perks and you will really, really suffer because you'll be an M1 killer with very little behind them. And that is where this killer can go wrong. The good communication between the teammates, the difficult loops, and the fact that any mistake you make are pretty damn punishing. On the other side, though, you can sometimes turn that against survivors. You can sometimes bait them into making bad decisions, going for a rescue when you know that they are 99 and you can interrupt them and down them. There are some other things that you can do, and Ghostface have a pretty good chance to win against most teams if they play it right. However, again, very difficult to play right. He is a difficult killer to play correctly, just because he's so punishing when any small mistake happens. That being said, a really fun killer. And that's pretty much all there is to Ghostface, I believe. Are we missing anything? I believe that about covers it. Next up is Legion, and even though he looks similar, Legion plays very differently from Ghostface. Legion has the ability, like Deathslinger, to inflict mend on survivors. In fact, that is his main power, to bounce back and forth from survivors and injure them immediately and force them to mend. Legion moves at 130 using their power. Once he hits a survivor or she hits a survivor, they recover their power and they can quickly hit another. And with duration add-ons, which are really, really good, you can reliably hit multiple survivors if they're grouped up. If they're not grouped up, you can still inflict a remarkable amount of pressure by hitting a survivor or two, canceling your power, walking a little bit, and then using it again. This works out fairly good. Even if survivors have medkits, they won't be able to use them right away because they'll have to mend. And if survivors have strong healing perks, they won't be able to use them right away. They'll first have to mend. So Legion is one of the better users of perks like Thanaphobia and perks that rely on survivors being injured, because he can reliably keep survivors injured and very, very quickly undo any healing that they may want to do. What happens once you've got everybody injured and you do it in such a way to waste as much time as possible? But survivors can make a lot of mistakes. And that would quickly result in you having a lot of pressure on them. If a survivor commits the mistake of going into a locker and you grab them, or stunning you and you have enduring and then you grab them, or somehow going down very, very quickly, like you hit them, you run away, they start to mend, and you catch them out of position. If they go down really quickly, you have an amazing start where survivors need to mend, they are injured, they need to heal, and they cannot come for a rescue because you're there and their teammate is dying on the hook and they need to quickly heal up and maybe find a way to get through. If they do heal up, that's a trap for them. You will quickly injure them again and keep the pressure up. And eventually, yes, you will be forced to go on chase and break some pallets. But once the pallets are really, really gone, what else do they have? They will be slowed down. You will bring perks to make the gens go very slow, and they'll run out of resources and they'll have a hard time really running you anywhere. This can be very, very, very oppressive. If you are good in your mind games, unlike some of the other killers, Legion only needs one mistake from the survivors. And survivors, when they're in their first match and they don't exactly know how good you are, they will often make mistakes or they will often get cocky. And that goes really, really well in your favor. If a survivor gets a little bit cocky against a Demogorgon, they get a hit and they run out. If they get a little bit cocky against your Legion, they're probably out of the injured because you use your ability, so they'll just straight up go down. And this is really, really powerful. So any perk that lets you do a mind game like Amaliers or Coup de Grace to hit a survivor through Dead Heart, or things like any perk or a good play that you create that results in a hit will have a lot more consequences than with some of the other killers, which is awesome. That being said, what is the optimal way for the survivors to play against you that you will often find? Number one, split up on gens. You might be able to hit one or two, but they'll make it very, very difficult for you to ever hit multiple survivors at once. And if you want to get them all injured, they'll make it very, 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 very difficult, very time-consuming, so that by the time you achieve it, they are already on their way to finish a few gens. Once they are injured, survivors that are smart will typically stay injured. And once they're injured already, your power becomes a lot less threatening. You really don't have a real power after that. You do have some tracking, yes, but out of the injured survivors, you now need to just down normally. And the really good survivors will make this very difficult typically. And the better and the bigger the map, the harder and stronger they'll be. So this is where the struggle really begins to show, and the main weakness of Legion. He's 1v1, and his chase potential on an out of the injured survivor is nothing extraordinary. In fact, it is perfectly average and perfectly normal. You can lose games just right here. If survivors just decide to stay injured and they're smart, maybe healing occasionally if they have a very good medkit, or if they have a perk to heal very quickly, or if they're dead on hook and they want to have a bit of safety, then maybe they'll heal, but otherwise they'll stay injured and focus on gens and stay away from each other. That's where your Legion will typically hurt. Your add-ons don't massively change the way you play Legion, but they do help a lot. Duration add-ons allow Legion to run for longer, which sometimes means more hits, or sometimes helps him cover large distances if they really, really have to. There are some utility add-ons to inflict certain debuffs on survivors. They're not the hottest thing, but they're all right. Don't forget that survivors will never be able to use medkits like styptic agents or hemorrhagic syringes. They'll never be able to use them on you if you just hit them with your power. And that is a really, really nice thing. Other killers that have to chase and hit you twice, they will be vulnerable to strong items from survivors. Now, Legion doesn't have to deal with that, which is pretty nice. And then you have some of the high rarity add-ons that can be pretty powerful, namely the iridescent button on Legion. This one allows you to break pallets after vaulting and have a map-wide terror radius that gives you perfect information on all the survivors once you hit one of them. Pretty oppressive stuff if you know how to use it right. So yeah, Legion is a well-rounded killer, very clear strengths, very clear weaknesses, and your ability to juggle with survivors and know where to spend your time and not commit to long chases without getting a really good palette or a mind game here and there is what's going to determine how good you can play them. But they're pretty fun, and even though maybe not for everyone, you should give them a try with an open mind. Next up is Wraith, and it is a joy to put him not on the absolute or close to the absolute worst spot, because Wraith, after his recent update, is so fun and so good. Now, the problem with Wraith in the past is that he was a killer that, much like Legion, is a 115 normal speed killer with nothing to help him in chase. Absolutely nothing. And he had the ability to go into cloak and be stealthy and move slightly faster at 126 movement speed. I mean, this was alright, but it really wasn't anything too crazy. You needed add-ons to move faster, to really take advantage of the stealth and the mobility, and other add-ons to, get some utility out of it as well. Now his base movement speed has been buffed from 126 to 150, which is massive. That is the speed of a survivor using Sprint Burst. And it's very, very, very remarkable. On top of that, his transition from cloaking to uncloaking is a lot smoother. And when he uncloaks, he gains a massive speed boost that you can follow up with a hit that has a disgustingly long lunge. This lunge is so good that you can actively use it in chase to get hits on survivors around short loops, much like the pig can. And it is very, very good. Add-ons that increase speed are still there. You don't really need them nearly as much, but you can still bring them if you want to have even greater speed. And the other add-ons now are a lot more useful and can be combined with each other. At any level of rarity, you have at least one or two decent add-ons. You have the ability to suppress your terror radius and do some real mind games and confusing plays where you uncloak, survivors hear you, they don't hear anything, and then you come around the corner and grab them. You have the ability with the Bone Clapper or Yellow Atom to completely muffle your bell so that survivors never know if you're targeting them or if you're across the map, because the sound is non-directional. You can also make your bell completely silent, which is really scary and plays really, really well on some maps. You can also add blindness to your surprise attacks, or add mangled, like Sloppy Butcher, to your surprise attacks. You can also have the ability to see Gen's progress, so you could replace one of your info perks with that, with the All-Seeing Pink Iridescent All-Seeing Spirit. And one of the best ones, you can have the All-Seeing Blood, which lets you see survivors' auras. In loops with little visibility, you can use this, or buildings, you can use this to pretty much mind game around corners, have wall hacks on the survivors and hit them in ways that are very, very hard for the survivors to expect and play around, which is incredibly good. Even though the Wraith still does not have any remarkably strong chase tool, which is one of the reasons that he's not an S or A tier killer, he spends so very little time between chases that this is something that is really remarkable that you should really consider. With other killers, you will hook a survivor, you will see someone with barbecue or guess where a gen is being done, take 20 seconds to go there, they will see you, they'll start running, they'll drop a pallet. With Wraith, this downtime between chases is almost non-existent. You hook a survivor, you see or you guess where someone is, you're there in 5 seconds, you maybe take a little time extra to come from an unexpected angle, and you're already threatening to hit them. And they already have to drop a pallet, or use an exhaustion perk, or straight up go down. So for that reason, he uses some perks really, really, really well. And even large maps, where other killers would typically struggle, are not that big of a deal when you can move this fast. So he has a decent chance in larger maps, a very, very powerful ability in close maps where survivors do not see you because of the walls. Don't forget that in large maps, the Wraith is now invisible from more than 20 meters, which is a blessing, because you can move at certain places knowing that survivors can never physically see you until you get to a certain distance. And if you come from certain angles, they won't even be looking from the places you approach. So he has a good few maps. Some maps where other killers would struggle, where he can do fine. And the places where he would struggle are the more pallet-dense maps against survivors that are very, very aware. Much like Ghostface, you have to mind about survivors running Spine Chill and being aware, or being on comms and calling you out. You can play around some of these things by moving your camera and being smart about your movement. But survivors can still be aware, and can still have sprint bursts, and can still be doing a generator next to a pallet and immediately pre-drop it. So you need to be very smart about your approaches. You need to be very smart about your ambushes. And the moment survivors begin to wise up, or you make a mistake, or they take a hit, and then everybody else is on guard, what happens when you don't have the power to ambush them, hit them quickly, and move on to the next target? Things begin to get a bit difficult. If once you are no longer an ambushing killer and you're just chasing them normally, you are perfectly predictable. And survivors will use and abuse any and all resources they have, strong windows, strong pallets, and so on, to make it very, very difficult for you to seal the deal, get a down, and get a hook. So don't be surprised if some matches you are hitting people left and right a bit, but once you hit them, it's very, very hard to down them, and your first few hooks take a long time to happen. That being said, though, great add-ons, pretty versatile killer. That can do well on a number of maps. The skill ceiling for him has been increased by a significant amount. So go and play him and tell me what you think. Next up, we have Clown, who was also improved significantly. Over the course of the last few months, Clown has received a few changes here and there that have been all really, really good. The first one is that when he threw a bottle, he used to slow himself down. This meant that throwing bottles in the open was basically useless. Unless you use bottles in loops, Clown would never catch up to you quicker. They removed this and made Clown not lose distance when he threw bottles. Great. And then a complete rework of his power happened, where he got a second kind of bottle, and his reload speed went from 5 seconds, which was very, very long, to 3 seconds, which is a lot more reasonable. So what do we have now with Clown? 2 bottles dives and all the base kit and so on. We have a killer that has no real pressure on the survivors. When you see a Clown chasing your teammate, you don't have to worry about traps in the grass. You don't have to worry about him downing your teammate and then immediately downing you. He is a fundamentally predictable killer. that's not particularly fast. That doesn't have any kind of teleport or crazy mobility, despite the bottles or anything. So you have a fundamentally predictable killer that doesn't have any real ability to be everywhere at once and exert massive pressure. So why is he a threat sometimes, and what is good about him? The thing about Clown is that even though he really lacks all of these things, his 1v1 is potentially quite good. If you throw bottles at the right times on many loops, you can usually shut them down within seconds, with survivors being forced to drop pallets immediately. If they drop the pallet and it's a safe one, you typically need to break it, because vaulting pallets always happens at the same speed. It's not like Windows, where he can slow you down with a bottle and you cannot fast vault a window. You can always fast vault a pallet. So strong pallets, Clown typically needs to get rid of them, but he can force them to be down if he plays it right. And the thing is, with these bottles, you would typically have, in the past, the ability to force survivors to drop the pallet. And if they don't drop the pallet, you could play around it, then they would typically use a dead hard or get a bit lucky and get it to the pallet. Now the Clown is a lot more consistent. If he has to reload in chase in 3 seconds, if the survivor is corralled, he can reload in chase, which is awesome, without having to need any add-ons to help him in that. Because he doesn't slow himself down, he can catch people in the open and zone and catch a survivor in out of position before they make it to a strong place. Once they're in a strong place, a good bottle will typically shut it down quickly. And if he gets to be on the pallet, he can also use 2 bottles. He can put a yellow bottle beforehand and then a purple bottle after that to speed himself up and slow down the survivors. And if you use this in a combination like this, even perks like Dead Hard are not enough. In most loops, 2 good bottles means an immediate hit. And this is quite important, because if a Clown has an insta-down perk, or a Clown has 8 stacks of Save the Best for Last, or some other thing that already makes him powerful, or if the survivor is already injured, a Clown can down a survivor very, 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 very quickly once the pallets are out of the way, or if the survivor is greedy and doesn't drop the pallets. So, the play for the survivors in general is to pre-drop pallets, play it super safe. If there are perks in play from the Clown, try to play around them as much as you can. And since he is a 1v1 killer, try to make the 1v1 as hard as possible. Otherwise, split up and do gens across the map, and he should typically be in a rough spot. There's also the fact that sometimes survivors are not stupid. If you throw a yellow bottle at the wrong spot, they will abuse the fact that they get a speed boost. If you throw it ahead of time to set up a double yellow bottle, like for example at Shack, if you're at Shack and the survivor's on the other side and you put a yellow bottle and then you throw a purple one at the right place, you will catch them. But smart survivors can realize this play, and if they see it coming, when they see you throw the second bottle, they might just leave. And then you will have wasted 2 bottles and potentially not be any closer to getting that down, which is tough. It is something that survivors can do. Luckily, most survivors that you'll come across, are greedy and don't realize all of these things. They'll think that you're a stupid Clown, and you will get away with some of these plays. But know that smart survivors can do and will do this kind of play against you. And that is the difficulty with Clown. You need to be smarter than the survivors that you're playing against, and they need to be a bit greedy and a little bit silly for you to really begin to shine. That being said, his add-ons help a little bit. We do have add-ons to make the slowdown even further, some add-ons to extend the invigoration to go faster for longer, and one very notable add-on, the cigar box, that lets you see auras of survivors. This is incredibly strong. At the start of the game, you can use this to find survivors hiding. If you have perks that are on a timer, like Make Your Choice or Hunt the Ground, you can use this to find survivors that are hiding from that as well and are trying to stealth it out against you. If you are invigorated for longer, you can see survivors for like more than 7 seconds all around you. Pretty strong stuff. You can also bring double 2 extra bottles, which means that you can abuse your bottles a lot more and be a lot more oppressive. And if survivors somehow make a getaway, you still have a backup of 2 extra bottles. This used to not be so good, but now, since he has a quick reload, having 6 bottles is really, really good. You also have to account for the fact that some maps don't have that many pallets and don't have that many windows. And once you're out of them, and that can happen fairly quickly if you pre-drop all of them, Clown can really begin to have a field day with you. If you take all of that into account, Clown has a fair chance. He also has an iridescent add-on that lets him see auras, and an iridescent add-on that lets him insta-down. Difficult to use, but potentially very powerful. Clown can use this to shut down any kind of rescue in front of you. You can do a lot of very mean things with the pinky finger, but we obviously consider it just a little bit. So Clown overall has definite strengths, but also weaknesses that you should take advantage of as a survivor. As a Clown yourself, you need to absolutely bring perks to up your lethality so that every hit really, really, really hurts. Either because it's an insta-down or because you recover from it very fast with, say, the best for last, the perk from Myers that really, really shines on him. And that's about it for Clown. His add-ons help a little bit. He's definitely much better than before, and he has a reliability to him where you know that you can catch a survivor once they made a misplay or once they're in a spot where it's not safe enough. But that sometimes is just not enough. Next up, we have Pig. And Pig has one of the weaker chasing potentials in the game. She has basically 3 powers, and we're going to break them down. She has the ability to crouch and remain crouched. She loses her turret radius in a few seconds. She moves very, very slowly, unlike Ghostface, which moves at normal speed when he is using stealth, or Wraith, which moves at incredibly fast speed. The Pig moves very slowly. So her stealth needs to be used very carefully. You need to have very good intuition or have very good perks to let you know where you're going and hope that the survivors are not using Spine Chill or calling you out or something, because you could potentially lose a lot of time using your stealth. Although if it results in a hit or a grab, obviously it's very good. So she's got a subpar stealth, which is fine. It needs to be used at the right time and at the right place. And also a subpar ambush, which serves as her only real help in a chase. When you're on a pallet, on a short loop, you can use your ambush very effectively to basically threaten to come from either way. And most survivors will take a hit if they try to play around it. You'll have survivors that are smarter, that will try to use their death hard to dodge it, that will just straight up go to another loop if they see you crouch. And you can use this to your advantage by then standing up and chasing them and trying to zone them out into another place where the same thing might happen again. This ambush at certain places really, really shines. If it's a pallet against some kind of corner and the survivor drops it, you can now use the ambush and you will get a hit. Where other killers would have to have a back and forth and it would be maybe a bit 50-50. With Pig, you can have guaranteed hits on certain places. And the fact that you can slide off certain holes and ramps with your ambush does give you hits in places where other killers would not, which is pretty dope. Unfortunately, her ambush doesn't really have synergy with perks, since you do not get to apply Sloppy Butcher or Instant Down. The best thing you can do with your ambush is save stacks to save the best for last, which is a really good perk on her. That being said, what are her add-ons looking like? Her add-ons are a bit of a mess. The ultra rare add-ons are not very good. They're a bit gimmicky, but not very powerful. Her basic add-ons increase her ambush potential, which is nice. But if you bring 2 of those add-ons, you are committing to using your ambush. And unfortunately, that's up to the map, and it's mostly up to the survivors. Really smart survivors, as we mentioned, they will leave the loop, or they will straight up pre-drop the pallet. If they pre-drop a pallet, you do not have the ability to stay in the middle and then begin to use your ambush. Unlike Cannibal, unlike Deathslinger, your power is mostly dictated to by what the survivors do and allow you to do. So you're not really oppressing them in chase, you're mostly hoping that they're in a place where you get to use your power, and when you do, you have a decent chance sometimes. But it's really a lackluster chasing power. However, the third power that the Pig has is perhaps the scariest and hardest to quantify, which is her slowdown. Once a survivor is down, no matter how long that takes, you get to place on them 4 reverse bear traps, or 5 with a certain add-on, which they will have to remove. If they don't remove these traps, they can die to them eventually in 2.5 minutes. All of this gets changed with add-ons. And this is, at the very least, a decent slowdown. At the very best, a very significant slowdown. If survivors are unlucky and they all have to remove their bear traps at the 3rd or 4th search, that is a very, very significant amount of time they'll spend doing that. During all that time, you will virtually be playing a 3v1, which even as a weaker chasing killer is still very much in your favor. On the other side of the spectrum, however, we have the instances where the survivors will just remove their bear traps on the first or second attempt every single time. And then you'll have a very lacking power where the slowdown is not really that significant. However, there's nothing preventing you, and this is one of the best ways to play Pig, from stacking this slowdown with other slowdowns. So you can have Ruin, Corrupt, all the perks in the world to slow down gens, and then on top of that, or slow down healing, and then on top of that, your power. And the add-ons to slow down the game are actually pretty strong and have very insidious uses. A survivor has 2.5 minutes to remove their bear trap. However, with a temper timer, those 2.5 minutes become 2 minutes. And I think it's 14 seconds or 12 seconds. Those few seconds that it takes to remove a bear trap can be increased with the right add-ons as well. So you can create situations in certain maps where survivors will literally die if they don't have the luck to get their search, their trap off on their first, second, or third. In many maps, in many situations, they will never get to a third or even they will never get to the fourth search or even a third sometimes. So you have add-ons that with the right combinations and with the right luck can straight up kill survivors for you. That is insane. One of the reasons why the Pig has one of the highest kill rates in the game is precisely this one. She has a natural slowdown, so even if you play her without any slowdown perks, she has a really good chance to slow down the game enough to win. And once she begins to set up traps on people, if she has the right add-ons, there is a very real possibility, about a 1 in 5, a 1 in 4, that these survivors will die. And when you do that every game on multiple survivors, those possibilities stack up. And with the right add-ons, you really have a good chance to get a head pop every other game. No question about it. That makes judging the Pig really difficult. If you play against really good survivors, they will make the first chases so difficult that even this will be a hard thing to do. However, in your typical match, this is not what happens. You will typically, even if it takes a bit longer than with other killers, you will typically start to get down before the game is over, of course. And then this is very much something they have to worry about. The average team does not 99 generators. Even if they did 99 generators, you could come in with Ruin and Pop to completely put a stop to that. So they really have to be very mindful about dying to the reverse bear traps. And this is, of course, assuming that you don't interfere. You can always just interrupt survivors and make it very difficult for them, reset their searches so that they have an increased chance of dying. So with the 2 or 3 add-ons that allow you to do this, Pig becomes a bit of a menace. Without them, she is a very mediocre at everything killer that is very map dependent, that is fairly predictable, that has a difficult early game, that is not particularly strong at anything compared to other killers, other than maybe the slowdown. So that is the real struggle of Pig. Still, however, everything I said is still quite powerful and worth considering, and you should respect the Pig. And I believe that's pretty much all there is to her. Next up, we have Michael Myers, aka The Shape. The Shape would also share some similarities with Pig, in so that some of his add-ons really elevate him, and he would be in a different spot if it wasn't for that. Myers begins in tier 1, where he has a 0 turn radius as he's undetectable, and he is very slow, moving at 105. Then he gets to tier 2, which is basically normal killer stats, except for the fact that he vaults a bit quicker, and he has a smaller turn radius of 16 meters. And then he can occasionally go to tier 3 for about a minute. And then in tier 3, he has an even faster vaulting animation, a bigger lunge, and insta-downs. This is a problem. Insta-downing is pretty tight. We all love it. But compared to some of the other things that killers can do without any kind of prerequisite, Myers cannot shred through pallets super quickly. He cannot ignore windows like some of the other killers. He cannot be everywhere at once. He doesn't have any particular form of mobility. And most of all, he starts the game out extremely slow. Moving at 105 speed in tier 1 is horrible. Survivors at that point are basically faster than you. You need to get out of tier 1 as soon as humanly possible. And going for a grab or trying to do anything fun with your tier 1 will most often than not backfire. So your number one priority as a Myers is to discard your initial disadvantage and get into tier 2 as soon as possible. In the best case scenario, you find a position where the survivors don't see you, you get a bit of a stock on 1 or 2 of them, and you get out immediately. Best case scenario. Worst case scenario, the survivors spot you, they all scatter around, they get behind buildings, behind good cover, and you don't have to chase them for a long time, and it takes you a long time to get out of tier 1. And in the meantime, you're being called out and gens are being done across the map, and you can't even begin to hit survivors. You need to get out of tier 1 still. This on larger maps is extremely crippling to your early pressure. And it's very, very unfortunate that such an outdated mechanic still exists. Once you're in tier 2, you do have the advantages of having a small terror radius. In some of the smaller, tighter indoor maps, this can be pretty cool. The smaller terror radius makes a difference. You can spook survivors quite a bit, particularly if you bring the add-ons and perks that make your terrors even smaller. But in most of the maps, it is not a real huge deal. You will be called out, you will be spotted from afar if the map is open. The fact that you have some semi-stealth really is not a complete game changer. You will build up your power and use it to get a down or 2. You cannot get too greedy by downing multiple survivors, as it is quite common these days to run anti-slugging perks. So you need to be mindful and be a bit conservative, get a down or 2 and start picking them up before they pick themselves up or get picked up by others very quickly. And in tier 3, you do have some chase amplifying capabilities. The big lunge can get you some hits. The fact that you vault faster is also notable, since you can sometimes catch survivors off guard and catch them around a loop because you vault a window very quickly when they didn't expect you to. But it's still pretty predictable and pales in comparison to some of the tools that other killers have, where they can get insta-downs, but they can also shred pallets, and they don't really have any timer attached to it, and survivors cannot outrun you for a little bit and play it safe until it's over, which is something that they can do against Myers. Against Myers, there's nothing stopping survivors from using their stuff, from hiding, from using their exhaustion perks to make some distance, and then pre-dropping every pallet and playing it super safe. And you need to be very, very careful about how you spend that tier 3, but also use it early enough to make up for the fact that you had no pressure at the start of the game, pretty much. Now, that being said, those are all arguments that would send Myers straight to the bottom pit, worst killer ever. So why is he not? He does have some add-ons that are quite powerful and change him quite significantly. First of all, we have the add-ons that you can stack together that increase his stalking rate. There's 3 of them. Typically, you'll be running Memorial Flower and the J. Myers Memorial. These add-ons make you stalk faster. So what would have taken you 5 seconds now takes you 4 seconds, for example. You can get out of tier 1 quicker. You can get into tier 3 faster. A survivor going into the open for a little bit means that you immediately have your tier 3 and can immediately down them next time they get close. This is good stuff. It doesn't really change him much at all, but it does eliminate his weaknesses a little bit, and if you play around your strengths, that can be enough. Then he's got the real game-changing add-ons that begin to shake things up a little bit. He's got the green bow tie, which will make his tier 3 take a little bit longer at the start, but then last for 90 seconds. 90 seconds of insta-downing is very concerning. That's a whole person dying on the hook if they're already on stage 2 with nothing to be done about it. If a Myers camps or if a Myers has a bunch of people down, it's a long, long time. And with some perks to slow down the game and so on, this is powerful stuff. You could also have the infinite tier 3 Myers, which if you have a weak link in the team and somebody beats him a lot and he gets tier 3, that can be also quite oppressive. This is an ultra rare add-on. The other ultra rare add-on, the Tombstone, makes him very slow and can be easily played around. It's not really all that powerful, but he does have a purple Tombstone piece. And this add-on is just straight up busted. Probably his most powerful add-on. It does make him have to stalk a little bit more, but it comes with the ability to just straight up murder and Moria a survivor, no matter how many times you've hooked them. So at the start of the match, let's say you're playing against survivors that are a little bit uncoordinated or unaware You get a good stock on someone, get up tier 1, get another good stock on someone else, get to almost tier 3, then you find somebody else, you get to tier 3, and bam, you immediately murder them. This is pretty wrong, and one of the reasons, much like Pig, this nuclear add-on that is really, really strong is something that I'm considering a little bit, and one of the reasons why he's a little bit higher up. His other add-ons are downright goofy or just worthless. Some of them are just straight up worthless. You'll never see them used. You'll never use them yourself. The mirror add-on, the vanity mirror is pretty garbage. The scratch mirror, some people use with map offerings, but you would never use these add-ons in a normal match where you go to any map. You know that it would be a waste. These are add-ons that people only use when they send themselves to a particular map where it can actually kind of shine a little bit. So they're pretty bad overall. But consider the fact that he's got add-ons that can change the game around that much. You gotta respect Myers at least a little bit. Next up is our newest killer, the Trickster. The Trickster comes with a plethora of issues, unfortunately. Let's walk about some of them, and then we'll get into the things that actually make him a little bit stronger than some people give him credit for. The main problem with the Trickster is that he is a killer that is 110 movement speed. He does have a smaller terror radius, but that's not a huge deal, considering he doesn't have any ability to immediately pressure survivors. And he cannot chase survivors normally around loops very well compared to other killers, because he's 5% slower. And instead, he relies on his knives that he throws. He starts with 60 of them and throws them very, very quickly, and can quickly hit a survivor multiple times and build up damage and eventually down or injure them. The main problem is that you typically don't have any real ability to pressure multiple survivors. Once a survivor is hit with a knife, if you leave that survivor alone, the knife meter will begin to decay passively. So if you find multiple survivors and you hit multiple of them and they all spread out, all of them will be fine, except for maybe the one that you decide to keep chasing for a little while. If you happen to go to a loop where the walls are very low, that's great for you. The Trickster in these loops is probably stronger than half the other killers in the game. You can keep throwing knives as the survivor loops you unsuccessfully, and if they remain in that area, you're going to down them eventually. You will miss some knives, hit some others, eventually you build up duo damage health state, and if they're out of danger, they'll go down. Simple as that. If they're smart, however, they won't remain there. They will hide a little bit, they'll take some knives, they'll even take the health state, and then they'll go straight to where they should go, the loops with high walls. In the loops with high walls, you're still 110 killer. You have been buffed, so he's a little bit better than on release, and you can throw your knives a little bit quicker and move a little bit faster, but survivors are still faster than you when you start to throw your knives, and they can typically outspeed you around walls, where they'll make it very, very difficult to use your power. And they'll also make it very difficult for you to use your normal hit as you are a slower killer. And this is where this killer begins to suffer. There are many, many maps that have high loops, most of them. And also maps where literally every loop is a high wall loop, like Hospital, Haddonfield, and pretty much maps where buildings are very prominent or they're indoors. There are some lower loops in some of these maps, but for the most part, survivors can find places where using your power is very, very difficult. On top of this, you have to reload your power every now and then, and when you use your power enough, you build up his second ability, the main event. In the main event, you have a cooldown, a little wind up that initiates when you press it. The survivors can see and react to this, and then you begin to throw knives very, 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 very quickly. You cannot stop doing it, and you cannot stop to move faster, so you're fixed at a certain speed, and begin to throw for a few seconds. There are some good and bad things about main event. Let's start with the good things. He doesn't use any ammo, so if you're out of knives, it doesn't matter. You can still use it and maybe get a down that you couldn't have because you had to reload. He also throws them very, very fast, so if a survivor is in a bad spot, you can use this to really quickly tear through health states, which is kind of nice. And yeah, that's about it. That's the good things. Now, bad things. You have a limited window to trigger this, and if you don't, it's gone. You cannot save it like Oni can. You cannot pick it up when you need it like Blight can. It is a power that you get when you build up your knives, and that if you don't use at the time, you lose again. This is pretty bad. This makes it so that in many situations where you could use it, You are forced to use it ahead of time because it's about to run out in a position where survivors will just react to it, begin to take cover, and because you cannot really go around and chase them, you will immediately have to cancel it. Luckily, after you use it, you only have a small cooldown and you can use your power again. In the past, the cooldown was much more severe, so it's a little bit better than before. But yeah, basically you don't get to choose when to use this power for the most part, and it is pretty rough. So difficulty in many maps, difficulty against multiple survivors spreading out. What are the good things about Trickster, if any? Number one, he can damage survivors at a distance. And this is a very remarkable thing, even if it takes him a while, compared to other killers. Other killers, if a survivor is approaching for a rescue, or multiple survivors are approaching for a rescue, you have to choose. If you go out and meet them, someone else will come. If you go out and hit them, they will come and do the rescue. With Trickster, you can just sit tight in one spot, begin to damage them. If they approach, they will now be damaged, and you can very quickly, after damaging them, go for an M1. Or keep throwing knives. That is a really another really nice thing about Trickster. Once you damage a survivor once, you can keep pelting them with knives, and sometimes, if they're busy in some kind of animation, already do a lot of damage for the next health state. So Trickster, in many situations, can begin to do multiple stages of damage, or very quickly do two stages of damage on some survivors, as long as he has the ammo for it, which is more than many killers can say. And this is great. If a survivor immediately springboards away, that will deny a hit for most of the killers in this game. Not for Trickster, however, he can play around these things. And unlike some other killers, a little mistake typically doesn't cost you as much. Missing with a hunting hatchet with a Huntress is bad. Missing one knife with this killer is not bad. As long as most of your gameplay is on point, he's fairly forgiven to mistakes, and you can, if you play him well in general, you don't rely too much on one particular good play, but rather on you being consistent across the board. And another really nice thing is that some of his add-ons do become a bit oppressive. Some of them are just straight up bad, and honestly, you will not consider. But some of the medium rarity add-ons are actually really strong. The USB stick, for example, makes survivors take one fewer knife, and you compare this with the fist spin soda, where your knife throwing rate is increased. And that means that a survivor doing an action in front of you can very, very quickly, immediately receive 5 or 6 knives in the back and be very close to being down. You could also use the ultra rare for iridescent photo card, which would allow you to do something similar and then insta down a survivor. There are some cool combinations that make Trickster potentially quite strong if survivors misplay it. However, you are still at the mercy of survivors being smart and splitting up. You are still at the mercy of the map being difficult for you. And you are still at the mercy of a power that needs to be reloaded, that cannot always be timed at the most optimal time, and a bunch of other factors that really limit this killer. Now, that being said, his ability to get hits at a distance and be unpredictable in what he can achieve in a very short period of time by hitting multiple knives on a survivor or getting hits through little holes and so on, means that he's a killer with a fairly high skill ceiling, and one that you could probably become scarily good at and make him look really, really powerful. And that's pretty much my thoughts on Trickster. I believe that pretty much covers it. We'll see if he changes in the future or not. And then we move on to Trapper. Trapper's in a sad spot. He is a killer that's just by nature very inconsistent. You can see him in big wins, and also see him in very, very shattering, heartbreaking losses. Just by the nature of his power being fundamentally RNG on top of RNG. Your traps can spawn in very nice places where you can pick them up quickly, or you could spawn in a map with very few traps where they're all really scattered. And if you don't bring add-ons, which are pretty much a must for this killer, to start with additional traps and be able to carry extras, it's really, really difficult to use your power. Much like Myers, you begin at a deficit where you must actively waste time for a chance for your power to work. You can set up your traps around loops in places where survivors will not step in until you corral them towards them. You can set traps in choke points where survivors will typically tend to go. You can even down someone, put them in the basement, lock down the shack. That's some of the most effective tactics you can do with Trapper. But most of these have easy counterplay from the survivors. All the meta perks that survivors typically bring are all really strong against most killers, but specifically against Trapper. And it's really, really difficult. Indoor maps have no grass. Large maps are hard to control and to keep a perimeter. Some of the more average maps have been reworked, and the grass keeps getting thinner and thinner, especially in low settings, which many survivors play in. Seeing traps on the ground is very easy on Macmillan maps. The ground is also much, much brighter. So the Trapper cannot hide traps as effectively as before. Does not have maps that really play into his strengths. He needs back add-ons to have a chance to use his power effectively. He must hope for situations where he can lock down places. And he must overall really be mindful of so many things. Maps that survivors can bring can find traps. Survivors with comms can call you out and identify the traps you've set and disarm them, or just keep them in mind and avoid the areas. And even if survivors have no idea where you've trapped, they can also just take it easy. And if they take a hit, don't go through grass, don't go through unsecure windows, don't walk through pallets where they don't know if you've trapped or not. Just take the hit and go elsewhere. And run away from danger a little bit. Let your teammates do gens, and do not give the Trapper a chance to get down. Once survivors really begin to play smart, he becomes much, much harder. Because you must have back add-ons, your other add-ons, some of which are pretty damn bad, are harder to combine effectively. The trap darkening add-ons, which used to be really, really good, are less and less powerful. As I said, maps now have thinner and thinner grass and are brighter and brighter every day, seemingly. So the map design and the game is slowly leaving the Trapper behind in many ways. He is a little bit better than he used to be in some regards. He can set up traps and reset them on the ground. The traps don't move anymore. Some of his iridescent ultra rare add-ons and some of his, his non-back add-ons can be somewhat okay-ish. Iridescent stone comes to mind. Honing stone is quite powerful and could quickly turn a game around. But you're ultimately relying on survivors making mistakes. And you're ultimately relying on a power that's difficult to use to work out for you. And as a Trapper main and someone that really loves Trapper, it really breaks my heart to say it, but Trapper is probably one of the hardest killers to play reliably and win consistently with. Some nice things about him. If survivors do make these mistakes, they typically lose very, very quickly and very, very decisively. And you can also trap Exegates. There are some things that are fairly unique to Trapper, and he doesn't need to deal with any one loop. He can always trap it on the go and use traps mid-chase, and with some add-ons and stuff, you can use this, and he can be fun and viable by all means. But he has a difficult middle game, potentially uncertain middle to end game as well. It's really, really tricky, and I think he's probably one of the killers that has gone the most in decline. On top of maps and survivor friends communicating with each other, you also have to worry about a number of perks. Survivors that step on a bear trap can be affected by borrowed time. If you hit them, they'll be freed. If you grab them, they can hit you with decisive. Survivors can hold the trap open, which allows other survivors to go over it. Survivors have a lot of counterplay against this killer. For their only power, and considering that this killer has only one real power, it is very difficult for you to do much about it. And with that, I think we're pretty much done with the tier list. I hope it made sense, and I hope it opened your eyes to some of the things. That being said, I am still not in possession of the absolute truth. We did do a lot of matches and demonstrations and research over the last few weeks, some of which you can see up there, to compare some of these killers and see them play it at a high level and so on. And I hope that you find those entertaining and you check them out. Don't forget that this is for a patch that hasn't come out yet. So if the patch comes out and there's some major change, something that really alters the way some of these killers are placed, I'll probably make a pinned comment and make a note if one of these placements changes very, very suddenly for some unexpected change or anything like that. But with that out of the way, I think that's all for my tier list. I hope that you enjoyed it, and thank you so very much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.